I moved to Ashton Heights primarily because it was a serene, family-friendly neighborhood tucked into the scenic, mountainous region of the Pacific Northwest. Dense pine forests surrounded the community, and in the distance stood a mighty peak that was occasionally crowned with steam, Mount Maribel. Locals had told me that Mount Maribel was categorized as a dormant volcano. While it had experienced minor tremors through the decades, no significant eruption had occurred within living memory, so everyone assumed it was safe. My name is Daniel Morgan. Officially, I'm the National Chief of Disaster Aviation, a role that typically demands I be near urban centers for the sake of logistical convenience. But as work had become more flexible over the years, and thanks to technology, I found it entirely possible to run my responsibilities from home, traveling only when necessary. I had spent the better part of my career responding to disasters of all shapes and sizes: hurricanes, tornadoes, wildfires, floods, and even volcanic activity in remote corners of the country. Whenever a major aviation asset was required, be it a drone fleet for damage assessment or helicopters for rescue operations, I was the one who authorized, coordinated, and monitored those flights. The neighborhood, on first glance, felt quaint and well-managed. Meticulously mowed lawns, friendly neighbors waving hello from their porches, children riding bicycles along the streets. Everything exuded a small-town comfort. I didn't think twice when I heard there was an HOA, the Ashton Heights Homeowners Association, because HOAs in many parts of the country are typical. They keep a neighborhood's aesthetics and communal amenities regulated. However, one name surfaced frequently when other residents welcomed me: Ms. Brenda Argus, though behind her back, nearly everyone referred to her as Karen. She was rumored to be the self-appointed gatekeeper of the association. The way people whispered Karen made me think of that internet-influenced moniker describing an overbearing, entitled woman, always ready to demand the manager. It was a bit comedic at first. I laughed it off, promising myself to stay low profile, maintain my yard, and stay out of trouble. A few weeks after moving in, I had my first run-in with Ms. Argus. I was placing some potted plants around my porch, trying to keep things neat while also giving the house a personal touch. She marched up the driveway, wearing large sunglasses and clutching a thick binder labeled HOA Protocol. The binder was stuffed with documents, color-coded tabs, and printed statements from city ordinances. "Mr. Morgan?" she asked, stepping onto my property as though she had every right to do so without invitation. I nodded and extended a hand. "Yes, that's me. Good afternoon." She did not take my hand. Instead, she flipped open her binder, clicking her tongue as she scanned what looked like a checklist. I noticed my name typed out on some official-looking page. My heart sank, even though I had done nothing wrong. "Yes, well, I'm Ms. Argus, the chair of the Ashton Heights Homeowners Association, but you may call me Ms. Argus. I see you've moved in recently, and I want to ensure you're aware of our regulations on external fixtures, decorative elements, and landscaping." I forced a polite smile. "Certainly. I read the booklet you left in my mailbox. I'm just putting a few potted plants out here by the porch. Nothing major." She shot me a tight-lipped grin that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sure you believe that, Mr. Morgan. However, your chosen shade for those ceramic pots might clash with the uniform aesthetics our neighborhood is recognized for. Did you clear the color with the HOA's design committee?" I looked at the pots. They were a subtle beige, hardly an eyesore. I didn't think I had to. "They're neutral." She cut me off with a wave of her manicured hand. "All items placed in public view must be consistent with the officially recognized color palette. That's in Section 3.1.6 of the guidelines. I can't let new neighbors assume they can do anything they want. I'm sure you understand." I stared at her binder, bristling inside but maintaining composure. In my line of work, I was used to bureaucracies, but this was absurd. Nonetheless, I calmly asked, "Where can I find the color palette to be absolutely sure I'm doing the right thing?" She gave a deep, patronizing sigh. "It's posted online, but most people consult me or the design committee first. Next time, do that. I'm going to consider letting this slide, but if you want your official HOA membership card, I might need to see that you're following all the rules." Part of me wanted to respond with an icy remark, but I nodded. "Thank you for letting me know. I'll be mindful from now on." "Please do," she said, turning around. Over her shoulder, she added, "Have a wonderful day." That was my initial taste of life under Ms. Argus, one small drop in a vast ocean of her controlling nature. I had no idea just how far she would go to enforce her perceived sense of power. Over the following months, I heard countless stories from neighbors about Ms. Argus's draconian enforcement style. She had threatened to fine a retired couple, the Johnsons, for planting too many rose bushes near their mailbox. She once rallied the HOA to petition the city to force a newlywed couple down the street to repaint their front door a less aggressive color because it was too bright a shade of red. None of these were particularly critical or life-threatening issues, but the tension they generated weighed down on the neighborhood. A pattern emerged. Anyone who opposed Ms. Argus's decisions quickly felt the consequences. She'd bury them under a mountain of official complaints, or she would call in a favor at City Hall to harass them with minor code enforcement checks. The rumor was that her brother-in-law worked for the local zoning board, giving her questionable leverage. At block parties, she'd take center stage, delivering mini lectures on the importance of community uniformity. One evening, I overheard her criticizing a family that had set up a barbecue pit in their backyard. "I have half a mind to call the fire department on them," she muttered. "That kind of open flame is unsightly. And who wants to smell that all afternoon?" People rolled their eyes but tried not to engage her. The older residents had learned that passivity was easier than confrontation. If you nodded politely and said, "Yes, Ms. Argus," she would typically leave you in peace, eventually. I, for my part, tried to keep my head down. Between my full-time responsibilities as the National Disaster Aviation Chief and local volunteer work, I had little desire to cross swords over pot colors or garden gnomes. But life has a funny way of forcing collisions. One weekend, I spent an entire day organizing a volunteer training session for a local search and rescue group. We had permission to use the public park for an educational demonstration involving an inflatable rescue raft and a small drone used for locating missing hikers. I invited a few neighbors, thinking they might be interested in seeing the drone in action and learning how search and rescue teams operate. During the demonstration, I heard a shrill voice demand, "Who authorized this event?" I turned to see Ms. Argus. She wore an HOA identification badge as if she were a police officer, and her arms were folded across her chest. "This is a publicly accessible park, and the city granted me a permit for the demonstration," I replied calmly, fishing the folded approval document from my pocket. She studied it, her lips pursed. I wasn't informed through official HOA channels. Usually, the association expects prior notice for gatherings over 10 people. I pointed to the signature from the city's Parks and Recreation Department. "I have the city's permission, and this is public land, not HOA owned. I'm sorry if there was a misunderstanding, but we're almost done here." She didn't relent. "We have noise ordinances and regulations about drones. I can't have that thing buzzing around, scaring children." One of the children, a 12-year-old boy named Evan, piped up, "Actually, it's really cool to watch. I want to learn how to fly drones too." This only seemed to fuel her annoyance. She let out a condescending huff, turned on her heel, and stormed off. "We'll see about that," she snapped, presumably intending to follow up with some formal complaint. For me, this was a minor annoyance, but a piece of me wondered what might happen if a bigger situation arose, one that would require quick, decisive action. How would Ms. Argus respond if I had to do something that directly conflicted with her illusions of control? One balmy spring night, well past midnight, I was in my study reading over emergency reports from across the country. A faint rumble disturbed the silence. At first, I thought it was a passing truck, but within moments, the house seemed to quiver. Books rattled on my shelves, and a small decorative globe rolled off a table. It was a mild earthquake. My immediate concern wasn't so much for property damage. None occurred, thankfully, but for what it might mean about Mount Maribel. Dormant or not, any noticeable seismic activity near a volcano warranted serious attention. My official responsibilities kicked in. I grabbed my phone and placed a call to the U.S. Geological Survey, USGS, contact in our region. A geologist named Dr. Patterson answered, sounding wide awake. He explained that a small swarm of earthquakes had been recorded in the region, possibly indicative of magma movement beneath Mount Maribel. "Nothing conclusive yet," Dr. Patterson said. "We're stepping up monitoring. I'll keep you in the loop. But you might want to be prepared, given your capacity for organizing aerial surveys, if this becomes something bigger." This was alarming news. Volcanic eruptions, especially in areas not used to them, can be incredibly dangerous. Evacuation routes, shelter logistics, and aerial support might become critical if events escalated. I jotted down essential notes, turned off the lights, and tried to sleep. Yet my mind churned with contingency plans, rescue protocols, and the potential need for helicopters, either to drop supplies or evacuate vulnerable residents. The next day, I discreetly reached out to local emergency management officials, offering my expertise if it came to that. I didn't advertise my official position widely among the neighbors, partly because I preferred to keep a low profile, and partly because I didn't think the good folks of Ashton Heights needed to fret unnecessarily. If something changed drastically, I'd make sure they got the information in a timely, organized manner. And so it went for about a week. A few small tremors, each lasting only a few seconds, came and went. The city posted updates, reminding citizens that we lived in a geologically active zone, but we shouldn't panic. Still, I arranged for a small helicopter reconnaissance to measure volcanic gas emissions. Because the flight path was near the neighborhood, I made sure the pilot kept the noise down, mindful not to create local drama. Of course, the noise was enough to attract Ms. Argus's attention. She filed a complaint with the city about rogue aircraft disturbing the peace. When she learned it had official clearance, she hammered the city's phone lines, demanding the pilot be fined. The city naturally dismissed her claims, but the seeds of her resentment grew. Privately, I overheard neighbors joke that Karen was more unstoppable than volcanic magma. At least lava flows can be redirected with enough engineering, but good luck redirecting Ms. Argus. The tension simmered, overshadowed by the quiet, creeping threat posed by Mount Maribel. A few months drifted by without incident. We enjoyed a quiet summer, though the USGS scientists kept careful watch on Mount Maribel. Then, in early autumn, subtle changes began. The peak frequently emitted columns of steam, pungent with the smell of sulfur. Some nights, residents reported seeing a faint glow around the crater, as if the mountain were humming with energy. Local media started covering these developments more intensively. The once dormant volcano had begun to awaken. The city council organized a safety fair, inviting geologists, firefighters, and emergency responders to speak about evacuation plans. I participated, giving a short presentation on how aerial resources could assist during a volcanic event, evacuating remote homes, delivering supplies if ash clouds blocked road access, and surveying eruption patterns safely from the sky. Interestingly, even though it was a public event, I did not see Ms. Argus there. Neighbors told me she had more pressing matters, like finalizing new HOA bylaw amendments. Over the next few weeks, official communications escalated. The state governor declared an eruption watch, cautioning everyone to be ready for a possible large-scale evacuation if conditions worsened. Some neighbors packed bags, kept their vehicles fueled, and had important documents ready. I coordinated with the county's emergency management office, planning a helicopter contingency for medical transports and supply runs if roads became impassable. Despite the looming threat, the daily life in Ashton Heights continued. Children still played after school, couples walked their dogs, and the biggest local drama was the annual fall festival. Yet an undercurrent of worry rippled through everyone's mind. What if the volcano really blows? I spent an evening double-checking the logistics. We had a few designated helicopter landing zones scattered throughout the outskirts of town, plus a large clearing near the main road for bigger supply aircraft if needed. The city had posted signs, and most of the population was on board with the plan. The only major concern was that one of the designated landing zones extended slightly into the edges of Ashton Heights, near the community clubhouse and tennis courts. I had a sneaking suspicion that Ms. Argus might try to meddle, considering how fiercely she guarded the HOA's property. So, I decided to pay her a courtesy visit. When I arrived at her door, a large reef blocked the peephole. While I stood there, I heard muffled voices inside. Eventually, the door flew open. Karen, dressed in a crisp pastel blazer, didn't look happy to see me. "Mr. Morgan," she said curtly, "are you here about those potted plants again?" I shook my head. "This is a bit more serious, Ms. Argus. The city plans to use the clubhouse parking lot as an emergency helicopter landing site in the event of a volcanic eruption. As you might know." Her expression soured. "Absolutely not. We have strict rules about aircraft in our community space. I, for one, We'll not have the tennis courts damaged by rescue vehicles or the landscaping ruined by helicopter landings. That was never approved by the HOA. I took a slow breath. Ma'am, it's a potential emergency measure. The city has coordinated with the county, the state, and the National Disaster Aviation Office. She raised her voice, ignoring my calm explanation. The HOA property is privately managed. You can't just roll in and turn it into an airport. I have rights, and I have a responsibility to keep this neighborhood the way it's meant to be. I tried to explain the life-or-death importance of accessible landing zones. We're not planning to park or store helicopters there for fun. In a real emergency, like if roads are cut off by lava or lahar flows, people's lives could be on the line. She smirked. Mount Maribel has been dormant for decades. This is hysteria. I won't be bulldozed into changing the nature of our community. I'll have you know I'm well connected at City Hall, and I can assure you the HOA will file an injunction if needed. I realized there was no reasoning with her that evening. I gave a tight smile, said a polite goodbye, and walked away. Though exasperated, I wasn't overly concerned. In a genuine disaster scenario, federal law would supersede local HOA rules. If it truly became an emergency, we would land wherever we needed to, whether Karen liked it or not. But her attitude didn't bode well for cooperation. A crisp morning broke over Ashton Heights with a spectacular sunrise. Faint ribbons of red and gold streaked the sky around Mount Maribel's silhouette. Little did we know that by noon, our world would be thrown into chaos. Shortly after breakfast, I received an urgent phone call from Dr. Patterson at the USGS. Daniel, it's happening. Seismic activity has spiked dramatically. We've got a major eruption in progress, or about to begin. You need to implement your evacuation and emergency flight plans immediately. My heart pounded. Understood. I replied, already moving to gather my official gear. We'll mobilize the helicopters as soon as we can. I raced outside. Neighbors flooded the streets, gazing up at the mountain. A swirling column of ash and smoke rose thousands of feet into the sky. It was a terrifyingly majestic sight. Sporadic booms sounded, and the ground shook. Soon, a roiling black cloud tumbled down the slopes. Pyroclastic flow, or at least a heavy ash fall that threatened local roads. Air raid-style sirens began to wail across town. Emergency alerts buzzed on phones, instructing residents to follow designated evacuation routes. A thickening ash cloud drifted overhead, turning the late morning sky grayish-brown. Tiny particles rained down, coating cars and lawns. I dashed back inside to don a protective mask and goggles. My professional instincts took over. I needed to coordinate helicopter movements. The county had 2 large rescue helicopters on standby, plus a handful of smaller ones from the National Guard. We had to set up a forward command post in a safe clearing to coordinate flights. Within half an hour, the first wave of ash blanketed roads, making them slick and dangerous. Panic spread. Older residents who lacked mobility needed immediate evacuation. People with respiratory issues required urgent help. Time was of the essence. Standing on my front porch, I radioed the lead pilot. Rescue 1, this is Daniel Morgan. Coordinate with local teams to begin extracting folks from high-risk zones. Copy that, Morgan. We're inbound, came the crackling reply. The plan called for the clubhouse parking lot at Ashton Heights to serve as a critical landing zone. Some neighbors who couldn't drive out on their own, or who needed medical attention, would gather there for helicopter pickup. The rest of the evacuees would funnel down the main highway if it remained open. I could see people rushing toward the clubhouse, many carrying duffel bags, some with frightened pets and carriers. The air smelled acrid, stinging the eyes. Suddenly, I heard an engine roar from the distance, the first rescue helicopter. My heart soared with relief. They were making good time. But as the helicopter approached the clubhouse, I heard angry shouting. From my vantage point, about a quarter-mile away, I could see Ms. Argus, Karen, standing at the parking lot's entrance, flanked by a few of her close HOA loyalists. They were waving signs reading "No trespassing, private property, and helicopters not allowed." I ran closer, stunned by what I was witnessing. Scores of frightened neighbors, many elderly or with children, were being blocked from entering the designated rescue site by Karen's small group. The helicopter hovered overhead, searching for a safe spot to land. "Stand back," Karen shouted. "This is not an authorized landing zone, as per the Ashton Heights bylaws. I will not let you turn our space into a war zone." People pleaded with her, tears streaming down their faces. An older woman with a walker tried to squeeze past, but Karen's supporters physically barred her. Meanwhile, the ash fall intensified, threatening to compromise the helicopter's engines if it had to hover too long. I rushed forward, my voice booming with authority. "Karen, move aside. This is a life-or-death emergency." She turned sharply, eyes blazing. "Mr. Morgan, I already warned you. The HOA voted, and we do not approve this. You can't just commandeer our private property for your helicopter fiasco. If people want to leave, they can drive out themselves. Some roads are blocked by ash and pyroclastic flows. People will die if you don't let them through," I said, exasperated. She sneered. "That's not my problem. The HOA has rights, and I'm here to enforce them. If you don't like it, take it up with the courts. But you're not dropping that noisy metal beast here." The pilot radioed me. "Morgan, we need to land soon or return to base for safety. We can't stay overhead much longer." Karen crossed her arms, as if she had just won a petty victory. She was no geologist, no rescue expert, and certainly not an official figure, but in her warped world, her self-appointed HOA authority trumped all else, even in the face of a natural disaster. Desperation welled in me. Lives were at stake, and we had only one shot at this extraction. I tried to reason again. "Karen, do you realize that preventing emergency rescue is a criminal offense? People could die." She barked a humorless laugh. "Oh, I'm sure you'd love to pin that on me, but I know my rights. You have no authority here." My frustration reached a boiling point. I couldn't stand idly by as she risked innocent lives. But I also knew that forcibly moving her might create a chaotic scene, and in the swirl of volcanic ash, confusion could be deadly. I turned to the crowd. "People, please, we need to get to the helicopter. If you can, circle around to the next street. We'll find another open space." Some neighbors began to scatter. I radioed the pilot again, instructing them to scan for an alternative landing spot nearby, a soccer field or large backyard. Meanwhile, Karen shouted at the fleeing residents, "Don't you dare trample our landscaping or I'll fine you all." "Fine us?" a young mother exclaimed, hugging her toddler. "What about our lives?" Karen's face twisted in indignation. "Don't exaggerate. This panic is ridiculous. The volcano isn't going to wipe out everything. And if you want to run away, go ahead, but not on my property." A local policeman tried to intervene, but Karen thrust her binder in his face, referencing HOA property rights. The officer, coughing in the ash-laden air, looked torn. "Ma'am, we are under a state of emergency. Please cooperate." "I'll cooperate when these people show respect for our neighborhood's rules," she shrilled, as though the policeman were an errant child. Finally, the pilot found a backup landing zone about half a mile west, a community baseball field that wasn't under direct HOA control. I broadcast instructions to the crowd to head there for evacuation. Adrenaline pumping, I sprinted to help direct them, leaving Karen behind. The policeman and some neighbors followed, trying to salvage the rescue operation. In the swirl of confusion, a cluster of families fled across side streets, many struggling with the heavy ash falling from the sky. Some older individuals needed help walking. The air was thick, making it hard to breathe. A sense of danger loomed as the rumbles from Mount Maribel grew louder. We reached the baseball field where the helicopter settled down, rotor blades churning, sending ash plumes swirling. One by one, people were escorted aboard. I guided the pilot to prioritize those with medical vulnerabilities. The helicopter lifted off, heading for the nearest safe zone beyond the immediate threat. Another helicopter soon arrived to pick up more residents. Yet, none of this would have been necessary if we'd been able to use the originally designated site at the clubhouse. Precious minutes were lost, and those minutes could mean the difference between life and death. As I gazed over the neighborhood, sirens blaring in the distance, a wave of anger simmered beneath my professional calm. Karen's arrogance and her petty sense of power were costing us dearly. But in the chaos, I had no time to confront her fully. My duty was to save lives, so I pressed on with rescue coordination, determined to protect as many people as possible. The eruption continued throughout the day, spewing ash across the county. Thick clouds blotted out the sun. Ash accumulated on rooftops, causing structural collapses here and there. Drivers had to pull off the roads due to near-zero visibility, and that meant more helicopter missions were needed to reach remote neighborhoods or isolated pockets of people who couldn't escape. My phone buzzed constantly with updates. Dr. Patterson's voice crackled in one message. "Daniel, the lava flows appear slow-moving, but the ash and pyroclastic surges are more dangerous. Encourage everyone to stay away or evacuate." I coordinated a small fleet of 4 helicopters, each ferrying folks to safer areas. Volunteers with large trucks helped transport others. It was a monumental effort made harder by the swirling rumors that the HOA, led by Karen, was still obstructing rescue attempts within Ashton Heights. Some residents reported seeing her patrolling with a bullhorn, shouting, "You can't park your vehicles here unless you have a permit," and no one authorized this chaos in my neighborhood. She seemed to treat the natural disaster as a personal affront to her curated environment. As the hours wore on, local law enforcement grew increasingly frustrated with her. At one point, a fire captain radioed that they couldn't get a water truck near the eastern section of the neighborhood because Karen's supporters insisted the truck had to use a specific entrance to avoid damaging the flower beds. The entire scenario felt surreal, a near-apocalyptic emergency hindered by an HOA's obsession with controlling everything. I was too busy with high-level coordination to handle Karen directly. But I knew, once this crisis ended, there would be a reckoning. The fact that she actively prevented a helicopter from landing in a designated rescue zone wasn't just immoral, it was illegal, especially under declared state of emergency laws. By late afternoon, the county established a formal Emergency Operations Center, EOC, at a high school gym outside the ashfall zone. I left the neighborhood in the capable hands of the rescue pilots and city officials while I traveled to the EOC to ensure that all disaster aviation operations were in sync with the broader strategy. There, I collaborated with the governor's staff, National Guard officers, and the local sheriff's department. We hammered out a plan to expedite further evacuations, coordinate medical response, and keep track of which areas were most at risk. Yet even in these top-level meetings, the name of that Ashton Heights HOA woman surfaced multiple times from exasperated police and rescue workers. She had done more than just wave signs. Apparently, she and her small group had tried to physically block rescue vehicles, and according to at least one complaint, they had threatened volunteer medical staff. Eventually, the sheriff asked me, "Morgan, do you have any direct authority to override these HOA folks? We keep hearing about them interfering, but we're stretched too thin. We can't tie up units wrestling with a local busybody." I let out a heavy sigh. Under normal circumstances, no. But under a federal or state emergency, yes, we have that authority. We can forcibly remove them. However, to keep the peace, we'd prefer compliance. He grimaced. "We'll do what we have to do. People's lives come first." And that, I thought, would be the end of Karen's interference. But I underestimated the lengths to which she'd go. Around dusk, I returned to Ashton Heights on a National Guard helicopter to assess the situation firsthand. The once picturesque neighborhood lay shrouded in gray ash, streetlights glowing dimly through the haze. Many residents had evacuated, but some insisted on staying or hadn't been able to leave. The air smelled of sulfur, and my boots left footprints in thick ash. Occasional tremors jolted the ground. I moved quickly toward the clubhouse area, accompanied by a National Guard sergeant. We found the parking lot deserted. No people, no rescue teams, no sign of Karen. Perhaps they'd moved on. Then a crackling radio call reached me. "Morgan, we've got a problem near Juniper Street. Another helicopter is trying to land to pick up a critical patient, but they're being blocked again by some HOA people." I clenched my jaw. Enough was enough. I sprinted through the ash, the sergeant on my heels. Several blocks away, swirling lights from a medical helicopter illuminated a small field ringed by houses. The pilot hovered, searching for an opening. On the ground stood a group of 5 or 6 individuals, including Karen at the forefront, brandishing flashlights and hollering at the crew. When I got close, I shouted over the roaring blades, "Stop this immediately!" Karen turned, her hair plastered with ash. Her once pristine pastel blazer was streaked gray. Yet even in this disheveled state, she carried herself with arrogance. "This is private community space," she bellowed. "No one cleared it with the HOA board for a chopper to land here." The sergeant stepped forward, voice booming with practiced authority. "Ma'am, I am Sergeant Lewis of the National Guard. Under the State of Emergency Act, we have the right to use this space for rescue operations." "Step aside." Karen shoved her binder at him, a binder that was now battered and dusty, yet she clung to it like a weapon. "I don't care about your act. My authority stands. You cannot just override our property rights." I could see the helicopter pilot's frustration. He was dangerously low on fuel, and the patient, a middle-aged man with severe respiratory distress from the ash, needed immediate transport. A pair of paramedics tried to move the patient on a stretcher, but Karen's group blocked them. My anger boiled over. Pulling off my protective goggles, I spoke in a commanding voice. Ms. Argus, Karen, listen carefully. I am Daniel Morgan, the National Chief of Disaster Aviation. In this emergency, my authority supersedes local statutes and HOA regulations. You are obstructing a medical evacuation and endangering this man's life. That is a felony under both state and federal law. Karen stared at me, momentarily unsure if I was bluffing. But the sergeant nodded. He's telling you the truth. Step back now, or we will arrest you. For a fleeting moment, I saw fear in her eyes. Perhaps she realized the severity of her actions. But the next moment, arrogance reasserted itself. She spat. I don't believe you. You're no chief of anything. You're just a meddler who moved here a few months ago. And you, she said, turning to the paramedics, find another place to do this. I will not stand by while my community is ruined by thoughtless. Enough, the sergeant barked and swiftly signaled two other guardsmen, who stepped forward to physically remove Karen from blocking the stretcher. She screamed, fought against them, and tried to claw her way free. You can't do this to me. This is police brutality. I'll sue you all, she shrieked. You're interfering with emergency services, the sergeant snapped, which is grounds for arrest under the emergency declaration. The paramedics hurried the patient onto the helicopter. Within a minute, the aircraft lifted off, the roar of the blades fading into the ash-laden sky. I turned to see Karen pinned by the guardsmen. Her supporters scattered, apparently unwilling to be arrested alongside her. She glared at me. You'll regret this, she hissed. My lawyers will have a field day with you. The HOA will. I cut her off. Karen, do you even realize how many lives you've risked today? At least now you'll face the consequences. She continued screaming, but her words were drowned by the chaos around us. The swirling ash, the wail of distant sirens, the beep of emergency vehicles. Finally, the sergeant read her rights, cuffed her hands, and led her away into the gloom. The last I saw of her that night, she was half-dragged toward a waiting National Guard truck, still shrieking threats. It took days for the main eruption to subside. Damage was substantial, but thanks to the coordinated rescue efforts, lives were largely spared. The city's roads remained treacherous with ash layers, and local businesses were shuttered for weeks. Shelters opened in surrounding towns, providing displaced families with food and a safe place to stay until it was safe to return. News outlets reported extensively on the disaster. They praised the helicopter crews, firefighters, and volunteers for their heroic efforts. But one story gained particular traction: the tale of an HOA board member who tried to block rescue helicopters. The local sheriff's department confirmed that Ms. Brenda Argus, often labeled as Karen by the media, had been arrested for obstruction of emergency services. Video clips emerged of her confrontation, showing her screaming that the neighborhood was private property, while paramedics tried to save lives. Public outrage was swift and fierce. She became a national laughingstock, the poster woman for misplaced priorities, arrogance, and callous disregard in the face of catastrophe. By the time the ash settled enough for residents to move back, Karen was in police custody. Her bonds were set extremely high, given the severity of her offense and the potential manslaughter charges if her interference had caused casualties. The district attorney hinted at additional charges, including assault on emergency personnel, given her physical altercation with the guardsmen. Local lawyers who might have defended her wanted nothing to do with the case. Press coverage labeled her HOA Karen, a name that stuck like glue. As for me, I spent another few weeks overseeing the aviation aspects of recovery, including ash disposal flights, aerial mapping of lava flows, and ensuring supply routes remained open by helicopter. Ultimately, once the immediate crisis waned, I turned my attention to the looming legal ramifications of Karen's actions. While it wasn't my personal vendetta to see her punished, I understood the need to set a precedent. No one should ever be allowed to jeopardize lives during a disaster by clinging to trivial, self-serving rules. Several months passed before Karen's trial date arrived. By then, the region was well on its way to recovery. Roads had been cleared, structures rebuilt or repaired. Plant life was slowly returning, aided by the mineral-rich volcanic soil. A sense of normalcy had been restored, though the scars of the eruption remained. Karen's trial became a media spectacle, with journalists from across the country descending on the courthouse. Her defense tried to argue that she lacked the understanding of how serious the situation was, claiming she believed the volcano threat was exaggerated. But witness after witness testified to her obstructive behavior, describing how she blocked rescue helicopters and verbally threatened neighbors and emergency personnel alike. Several rescue workers, including paramedics, described how her actions caused critical delays. One older woman tearfully recounted how she had to crawl around the clubhouse fence to avoid Karen's blockade, nearly collapsing from an asthma attack before paramedics reached her. I was called to testify as well. I explained my official role, detailing how the designated landing zone was chosen and how the HOA had been notified. More importantly, I described how, under the state of emergency, interfering with rescue aircraft was unequivocally illegal. The prosecutor asked me to elaborate on the potential consequences of Karen's interference. Lives were at risk, I said plainly. Ash inhalation can be deadly, especially for those with respiratory conditions. Blocking a helicopter from landing isn't just a violation of some minor rule, it can be lethal. And that's what Karen refused to understand. When Karen took the stand, she tried to defend her actions, claiming she was only protecting HOA property from damage and that she had no idea it was so dire. The prosecution swiftly pointed out that she'd been repeatedly informed it was a life-or-death emergency. Video evidence showed her ignoring both police and National Guard orders. It didn't take long for the jury to deliberate. The verdict was unanimous, guilty on multiple counts. The judge, clearly disgusted by her lack of remorse, handed down a severe sentence. Karen would serve a notable prison term for obstruction of emergency services and assault on a National Guard officer. The civil suits from affected residents were also piling up, and the HOA distanced itself, disclaiming all responsibility for her extreme behavior. In a final blow, the local government seized her property, both to cover mounting fines and restitution. Her beloved binder of HOA regulations would do nothing to save her from this devastating outcome. With Karen's downfall, the neighborhood experienced a sense of collective relief. The Ashton Heights HOA underwent a major leadership shakeup. New board members introduced more reasonable regulations, focusing on genuine neighborhood well-being rather than petty power plays. The story of HOA Karen became a cautionary tale shared at block parties and city council meetings, reminding everyone how quickly a false sense of authority can turn into real, dangerous harm. Mount Maribel's eruption eventually settled into a period of quiet once again, leaving behind a changed landscape and a changed community. Many of the neighbors returned to rebuild or repair their ash-damaged homes. Bonds were strengthened by shared hardship. Families that once barely knew each other grew closer, forging new friendships in the wake of adversity. As for me, once recovery efforts concluded, I went back to my day-to-day responsibilities as the National Disaster Aviation Chief, though I continued living in Ashton Heights. I liked the area's natural beauty, and now that the HOA was under sane leadership, it was actually a pleasant place to call home. Sometimes, neighbors teased me good-naturedly. "Daniel, you sure taught Karen a lesson. She really messed with the wrong guy." But in truth, it wasn't about teaching her a lesson for my own sake. It was about upholding the fundamental principle that, in a crisis, we must work together. Ego, arrogance, and misplaced authority have no place where human lives hang in the balance. Karen learned that lesson too late, and she paid dearly for it. Our neighborhood carried on, the memory of ash and flames etched into our collective story. Whenever I stepped onto my porch, I'd sometimes glance at the faint silhouette of Mount Maribel, its peak quiet under drifting clouds. We'd seen firsthand the power of nature and the power of misguided human obstinacy. Yet as the fresh grass sprouted over the charred ground and the sound of children's laughter returned to the sidewalks, I believed wholeheartedly in the community's resilience. And that is the tale of how a petty, overzealous HOA Karen tried to stand in the way of an emergency helicopter rescue during a major volcanic eruption. Unaware that the quiet neighbor she kept harassing turned out to be the National Disaster Aviation Chief. Her ignorance and arrogance brought her to the final judgment of the law, ensuring she could never again endanger innocent lives in the name of her trivial HOA rules. In the end, she didn't just lose her freedom. She lost the very property she fought so desperately to defend. Justice was served, and Ashton Heights moved forward, stronger and wiser than before.